So that was a brief overview. I'm just going to talk about some of the pieces in particular now. This piece was, I guess, talking about us as a consumer society and our mass consumption and deforesting of the rainforest to make these 99-cent burgers, which I survived off of for years. And basically, I was always taken with that scene in A Christmas Carol where Marley comes back to talk to Scrooge, and he has this chain, and he explains to him that every link in the chain is a karmatic debt that he owes to society. And I kind of figured that we were like kind of compiling this giant mound of hamburgers as a society. We were this karmatic debt, right, through these great big mounds. And so this piece was particularly centered around Big Macs, but you'll see this theme pop up a lot through the body of work. This is a landscape. This was called Day of the Earth Pigs, and I did drive an SUV for many years. I remember one time looking out my friend's window. He had a studio down by the highway, and all I could see was just SUVs everywhere, up and down the highway. Everybody seemed to have one at this point in history. So some of these pieces actually are a little older, and some of these pieces I'll take you all the way up to the current body of work in this, or the most recent pieces. Next. This is the Cadillac Ranch outside of Amarillo, and I used to live in Oklahoma. I was married and lived there for a couple years, and I'd always pass by this place called the Cadillac Ranch in Amarillo, and it always fascinated me. And I'd always stop, and I'd always get out, and I'd always wander around there. And anyway, this for some reason became like a significant sculpture in my life, like kind of this back and forth, the midway point between Oklahoma and Santa Fe. Next. This is the other side of the Day of the Earth Pigs. And this is actually the scene that I saw out of my friend's window. You'll notice the clouds are complimentary of Toy Story. And basically it's got a kind of a Pueblo vocabulary of design on a round vessel. I always, vessels are interesting because you have to have a narrative that starts and begins, right? A circular narrative rather than a one panel kind of story deal. Next. This is another vessel that was centered around the Santa Fe landscape. We have the bones and collective debris of the previous generation beneath the street. And I'll do a lot of this. Lots of times I see landscapes as mile markers in time. So it's interesting to look back at the older landscapes of 20 years ago now, that I've been doing this for the last, I guess, 25 years, and to just see what the landscape was at that time in my life. But anyway, like I said, I always find landscapes of particular interest because I see them as windows or mile markers in time. Next. This was a bowl titled Day of the Earth Pigs, which later became a pot. Sometimes I'll work in that motion. People will say, oh, we love this bowl. Can you do us one like that for our museum? Yes, okay, next. This would be the reverse side of another pot. This was, I remember this one in particular, I guess this made it in here because of the stone building on the left. And this building was outside of my studio, and it always fascinated me. I guess I've always wanted to live in this stone warehouse type structure. But anyway, so that building always stuck out, and I put it in the left-hand corner there. Again, I've used the clouds from Toy Story in there. Okay, next. This is American Dream. As I had mentioned for all too long, I survived off 99-cent hamburgers. Significant chapter of my life. Next. This would be there's a close-up of this stone building that always fascinated me, and the urban landscape in general. Something about the Santa Fe urban landscape has always fascinated me in that it really reflects the triculturalism of Santa Fe. You have the adobe and stone buildings of the historic era, but they all have satellite dishes, right? And modern SUVs in the driveways. Next. This again would be the same kind of subject matter of dealing with our karmatic debt, but instead of little people piling up hamburgers in the this is the Giants, okay? So the Giants are piling up our debris of SUVs. So I guess at this particular time of my life, I was kind of obsessed with SUVs. So I'll like work through these things in the art. Whatever I'm kind of obsessing off of at that point in my life becomes, so I got rid of the SUV, by the way. Okay, all right. Okay, next. This is just kind of fun, coyote and hound, just whooping it up. Next. Another dancing coyotes. Some of this stuff doesn't necessarily, is more just visual. Some of it has more messaging to it. Some of it's just more kind of playful. Next. One of the things I always liked about being an artist is you can manipulate the landscape, right? So these are like the giant heads on Easter Island, but instead I've made them Pueblo Anasazi giant heads and I put them outside Chaco Canyon. So I always have fun with that, manipulating the landscape, putting stuff into the landscape that's not necessarily there, putting stuff that was there or stuff that should be there. But anyway, one of the beautiful things about being an artist is you can do this. You can actually manipulate your landscape. Next. Industrial landscape. I guess I was just kind of emphasizing about fossil fuels by putting the dinosaur bones in there and the grisly stacks of smoke clouds coming out of it. Next. This was a piece, alien abduction scene. Next. This was a little Volkswagen that was abandoned outside of, it was in the Arroyo, and I had my 3 kids this summer. I have the first batch and second batch, and this was the first batch. They were living with me that summer, and they used to play all day in the Arroyo on this old abandoned Volkswagen. And at the end of this summer, I remember the oldest boy had to go home back to Berkeley, and he sold the car to my daughter, and we wrote up a little pink slip. Next. This is our old pal Sisyphus here, and I just woke up one morning, and it just felt like every day had become this massive struggle, and I was rolling this boulder up this hill every day, only to have it roll over on me every night and crush me, and I would start again anew in the morning. So that's kind of the story of Sisyphus. He's condemned for all eternity. He has to roll a giant boulder up a mountain, and when he gets to the top of the mountain, the boulder rolls over him and crushes him. And I just thought this was a pretty good allegory or metaphor for my life at the time. It just felt like this constant struggle, and every day there would be this boulder in front of my house that I'd have to roll up the hill. Next. This was a piece I did during the Iraq War, and I remember I had always been fascinated by Picasso's Guernica, and I was actually watching CNN this one morning, and I didn't really have anything set in my mind what to do, but to see the news or the image on the screen that particular morning was of an Iraqi man pulling his son out of the rubble of a bombing attack that had took place the night before. And anyway, it kind of came to me that I would do this Guernica piece. So this would be the far side of or one side of the pot, and it's based on Picasso's Guernica, but I've stylized it in my own way, and it has the dead infant child kind of clutching at his mother's bare breast beneath a halo or a sky of cascade, let's say, of falling interballistic missiles. Next. This is the other side of the pot, and the cascade of missiles is actually coming out of the fire and clouds of 9/11. And I remember when I watched 9/11 on TV, it really stuck out to me. I guess I never got the image of the people jumping out of the buildings out of my head. To this day, I still think about that wow, you would rather jump to your death than burn alive. Anyway, this kind of this particular image was just ingrained in my head of these people leaping out of the burning World Trade Centers to their death. And then actually it probably should go this pot first and then the second pot, but anyway, I'll take care of that. Okay, next. This is the Santa Fe landscape again, and we have the colonial adobe buildings and the Indian teepee and the kind of like the hippie bus wagon, right? Which was parked in front of my house for quite some time. It's all above the ruins of the previous residents of the Santa Fe area, the Pueblo Indians that once inhabited the area. Still do. Next. Kaboom. I remember I never even knew what a car bomb was growing up in Berkeley, and then all of a sudden they were in the news every day. You would turn on the news and there would be another car bombing. So lots of times a current affair or current event will kind of show up in the, whatever, like I said, I'm kind of reflecting on at the time, usually shows up in the pottery. Next. I was an alcoholic for many years, struggled with this. So did my family and my friends and people around me. And it seemed like whatever I did, I couldn't get out of this this just had this grip on me. And try as I might, I never really could come to terms with my drinking. I have been sober now for quite some time, over a decade. 15 years. Thank you. Thank you. So this piece was probably 15 years old. And at that point, I was probably feeling very trapped in this cycle of alcohol abuse that I had found myself in. Next. This is the other side of it. Like I said, kind of based on that Robert De Niro scene where he goes, every time I try to get out, they keep pulling me back in. So it was kind of going on that, right? Every time I tried to quit drinking, somehow I wound up back in it. Okay, next. This piece was titled In the Beginning. And what I kind of was doing at this time, and this was the most successful of all of them, but I was taking creationism and Darwinism, and I was making my own kind of beginning mythology or narratives of the beginning of time. And people just assumed because I was American Indian that these were actually like factual based stories, but they really weren't. I was just making them up as I'd go along. And this particular one has to do with the tail. I remember this now. It's all coming back. Okay, so in the beginning, man created, the creator created the universe. And he made all things, all the stars, all the planets, all the creatures in the universe. He made coyote, fox, hound, man, and he gave them all a great tail. He gave all the creatures a tail, but man he gave the greatest tail to. And the other animals were jealous, and they went to the creator, and they said, Creator, Creator, we have a problem with this man. He flaunts his tail around the plaza, and he sashays through the village, and he waves his tail, and he's making us jealous with this tail of his. He has no humility. And the creator said, you're absolutely right. I've been watching this man, and I have a problem with him too. He's not humble at all. He has no humility, and we'll do this. We'll teach him humility, and we'll do this. We'll take his tail. He said, we'll have a big fiesta, and when we get drunk and pass out that night, we'll clip his tail off. So they go ahead and they have a great big fiesta, and they all get drunk, and they pass out on the plaza, and they clip man's tail off in the middle of the night. And when they all awake, man realizes, aha, you have no tail. But this works the opposite, because without a tail, man realizes that, or thinks he realizes that he's truly divine among all creatures in the universe, and that he alone stands alone as the tailless creature. So people would say, that's fascinating. Is that an old Coach D story? And I'd say, yes, it is. Next. This is one morning I woke up after my divorce, and I was able to leap tall buildings in a single bound again. And I knew I was done. I had healed and come through the other side of it. Next. This is Saint Sebastian, and he was martyred by the Romans, but it also played into a episode in the Pueblo history. There's a similar character that's a priest that's martyred by the Pueblo Indians. Anyway, I kind of just put the two together and created this image. And I used a lot of Frank Miller. I don't know if you guys read comic books, but I love this guy called Frank Miller. And I like his, one thing I love about Frank Miller, he did Sin City as well, was his blood splatterings, right? He always has this kind of way of doing blood and gore. And anyway, I tried to emulate that in this particular piece with the blood on the back of the post and the drip patterns and whatnot and so forth. Next. I have a little boy named Paris. I'm a big fan of the Iliad and the Odyssey. It's shaped my early childhood views on romance and the Greeks and all that. And I named my son Paris after Paris of Troy in the Iliad. He's the archer that slays Achilles. And lots of times, I think Paris is this really misunderstood character in the Iliad, that really they view him kind of like in the Iliad, he's referenced as it was a cowardly act. But really, I see it as kind of a smart way of dealing with a problem. Anyway, long story short, I've always liked Paris. I thought he was a very misunderstood character in the Iliad. He's very passionate, right? He steals Helen, which starts the war, which leads to the poem, which leads to the later book that fascinated me as a child. So next. This, let's see, great corn mother, Povey still doesn't realize she's marrying a monster. Okay. Povey is a generic Indian name. It means flower. So lots of the girls in the Pueblo are named Povey. You have Joe Povey, Ho Povey, Hong Povey, but it means flower. So I kind of used just Povey in this one. And this is after me and my wife had we were married, but we had our first real fight, right? The one that really you can't take back what you said. And I think in a way I was trying to say that that moment where you realize this person is not the person I thought I married, right? And you're like, well, you're stuck with me now. But anyway, so she's marrying the monster, so to speak. And I think with all of us, there does lurk this kind of dark side, and we don't really reveal it until till we're sure that it's late enough in the game, that this person is ready to really realize what a monster they actually married. So this is this goes on. This is a happy story anyway. In the end, me and my wife are currently married, and we get along very well. But this was that moment where we had our very first fight, and I said some pretty horrible things that there was no going back on. And my wife realized that perhaps I was not the person all along that she thought I was. But I'm not that far from it, so, okay. This is a kind of like, I do this series called Fallen Angel, and and it has to do with the drinking, of course. And this is Angel before he's fallen, but he's about to fall. So next. I call these manscapes, and they're just kind of like these little, so not everybody wants a real heavy piece for their house, right? So you kind of got to do some stuff that just makes people kind of look at it and go, oh, it's New Mexico, great. Okay. So, okay, next. This is actually one of my favorite ones out of the series, and this piece is titled Narcissist. And at the time, I remember I was having these dialogues with my wife every day. You're such a narcissist. You're such a narcissist. And anyway, I really kind of examined this situation, and I examined stuff through my work, right? While I'm working on this, I'll ask myself, well, maybe I am a narcissist, maybe I'm not. But in the end, I kind of came to the conclusion that while I do engage in narcissistic behavior, I actually am not truly a narcissist. But so one thing I always liked about this piece in particular was the feet on the top. And if you've ever stood at the river and looked at yourself in the river, your feet are actually cut off like that, yeah. So I thought that was a very kind of a third dimension kind of view on this all, that this is actually how this actually does read from a third party above, looking at your feet and yourself in the river. Okay, next. Another New Mexico landscape. This one was quite popular. It showed up on a magazine cover for New Mexico, kind of like, I think it was New Mexico magazine. And kind of in this one, what I do with the stars, okay, I'll explain this whole space thing, because this is a good example of it. This actually, the sky is called the Kirby Crackle. And this was from an artist called Jack Kirby that used to draw Fantastic Four. It was one of my childhood favorites. And I love the way this guy drew outer space. Every page that he'd do a space scene, I would just thrill to it. And I've always thought that if you actually had like Superman's vision or superhuman sight, and you looked into the night sky, you would actually see the beginnings of the universe unfolding. And you would see stuff like stars cracking and quasars pulsing, and just these bursts of light and electricity throughout the night sky. So I kind of do my sky scenes with the assumption that they're kind of like these super glorified interpretations of the night sky in New Mexico, which we do have some beautiful skyscapes, but not quite as like this. But anyway, that's what's going on there. And these guys are just kind of, it's a very typical New Mexico landscape, right? You got the trailer house and the defunct automobile and the people by the burn can out at night, kind of just playing the guitar, right? Okay, thanks. Don't shoot, Diego. They are enemies of the church, and this is war. Translated from Spanish. I always like that part. Okay, so I guess I'm going to say this is loosely based on experience my son had. My son and my father were both veterans of the Marine Corps. They were both combat veterans. My father had been in Korea, and my son had been in Iraq. And this was loosely based on a story he kind of told me. But what was interesting to me is that the story could transcribe. It could be Marines in Iraq, it could be Romans and ancient Hebrews, or it could be Pueblo Indians and conquistadors, right? So really, that's kind of what's going on there. Don't shoot, but they are enemies of the church, and this is war. Next. This is a Uma Thurman done as a Pueblo Indian. I kind of took that off the Pulp Fiction poster, and I actually had done a much larger one with the full body shot, and someone probably commissioned me to do a smaller piece out of that, which I do a lot of. You know, like I said, I gotta make a living at this. So, but having said that, I don't compromise when I do these things. I put my all into it, and I think I kind of put this one probably in here because I like the blue. I'll use this blue paint is problematic and causes me a lot of grief, so I use it very sparingly. But when it does work, and it works perfect, it makes for a great image. Next. This is the priests out at Hopi. During the Pueblo Revolt, they marched the Catholic priests up to the cliffs, and they threw them off. So this was a piece based on this little episode in history. I don't know if you're familiar with the Pueblo Revolt, but most people aren't. And it is an episode of our history that is very little is written about, and you don't see any movies about it or documentaries. But yes, it did happen. The Pueblo Indians revolted in 1680 and drove the Spanish from Santa Fe back into Mexico. And it's actually listed as the only successful native campaign in North America. It was the only time the Indians ever won. Next. This is industrial landscape again. Okay, now this brings up a term, and this is called environmental racism. Okay, I don't know if you're familiar with this term, but I'm going to make you familiar with this, okay? Environmental racism is if you are from a low economic situation and you or your community has no money or legal representation, then ultimately big industry will build and dump in your backyard. So these people are kind of living and going about their daily affairs, but they do that in the shadow of big industry. So with this, we also have all the classic kind of things. And I remember now, this was a commission for someone in particular. So I went ahead and I kind of pulled out all the gags on it, so to speak. He wanted the ground with the remains on there. He wanted the night sky. And he also wanted an environmental landscape, all kind of put together into one. Okay, next. This is our feast day, Cochiti Feast. This is our traditional dress. We wear this for ceremony when we dance, and we do this every year. The tribe gets out there and does a dance in the plaza, and there's usually about, I'd say, probably about 600 dancers, maybe 800 altogether. That's the whole tribe, those that are feeling it and can still do it. So anyway, we do this dance, which I'll show again later in the presentation. And there's positively no picture taking, no recording, no sketching, none of that. It says right in big letters on the sign. But people go ahead and do this anyway. So this is a particular incident. I would be the third party in front of this person, and I was dancing that day. And I remember this girl, during a break, pulled her phone out of her belt and took a selfie. And it was an interesting reaction because, and if you really look at their faces, you can see like some of them are kind of with it and kind of mugging for the photo and like, yeah, post that. And the other ones are like, I don't know about this, right? This is, I don't remember that ever happening before. But anyway, so this kind of evoked an interesting question among Native people in particular, because they were like, well, it comes to the whole thing, if you're from the culture, does it make it all right to break the rules? And the answer is no. Everybody seemed to say at the end of the day that this person should have known better. Next. This is Achilles, the death of Achilles. And this piece, I had this, okay, so my aunt was on her deathbed, and me and my brother were going down to visit her to say our goodbyes. Now this aunt had particularly never liked me or my brother. We had always been her eyesore half-breed nephews that were neither, that she really never was accepting and never really liked us. And I remember me and my brother discussing this on the way down as we were getting ready to see her for the last time. And my brother said, well, you know, there's that chapter in the Iliad where it's the death of Achilles, and Odysseus and Patroclus have to compete for the armor. And when it's done, Odysseus wins the armor, but Patroclus is so grieved that he commits suicide. And that Odysseus then has to give the eulogy for Patroclus. So he starts by saying that in life we were not friends. As a matter of fact, we were fierce competitors. But in death, all is forgiven. And I took that with me, and I saw my aunt, and I hold on to that to this day. In death, all is forgiven. And anyway, that's where this pot kind of comes out of that space. In death, all is forgiven. Next. This is a kind of, again, the environmental landscape. These kids go about their like daily affairs, right? They're little boys playing football. But here again, they're doing this in the shadow of big industry. And yeah, okay, next. I can't all be, it's got some optimism in there. So anyway, this is I-10 out there by Coachella. And anyway, that's a direct landscape. I was driving down I-10 by the windmills, and I seen this little smart car. And I was thinking, well, you know, there's maybe a hope for a different future. Maybe we'll eventually leave fossil fuels behind, right? When that's, let me explain something. I grew up in Berkeley. I'm always gonna lean left, all right? So just make that clear, okay. Next. This is our old pals, the Ninja Turtles. Next. This is Girl in the Anthropocene. So this was actually a more, I guess, my favorite out of all the environmental landscapes that I did. That's why I put it in here. And the girl is on the right, and could be her older sister or her young mother, who knows, but she's very pregnant, and they're going through the mundane. Again, they go about the mundane, but they do so, again, and they live and exist in the shadow of big industry, which affects her unborn child, right? Okay, next. This was actually a crater vase. So this was kind of a theme piece, right? It was instead of Greeks, it was Romans, but it's actually got handles. It's a cup, it's a giant cup. So next. This piece, wow, let me think about this for a second. Okay, this piece is in the Crocker Museum in Sacramento. Now this priest, Juniper Sierra, was recently canonized by the Catholic Church, but he did these brutal things to the Indians of the Southwest. He enslaved them, and he tortured them, and he beat them, and he made them build his church, which still to this day is out in San Diego. So they had recently canonized this priest, and the Native community in California had a real problem with this. So this piece was done as a kind of a retort to this, and but it was actually received really well by the Catholic Church, who felt that the native was significant of Jesus, and that the priest was bringing Christianity, and that Jesus was represented in native form here. And that, anyway, there was a print that came out of this, which actually went to the Theological Institute in Boston, where it hangs at the 7th station of the cross. So it's really kind of funny because every once in a while I'll take these like jabs at the Catholic Church, but Catholics seem to really identify with this stuff and they love it. You know, they're like, that's a great picture of Jesus. So I don't know. Okay, whatever. That's the beauty of art, right? We all bring our own things to it, and we all read our own stories into it. And there's really no, even as an artist, you have to realize that there's no really kind of set in stone narrative, right? That everybody's going to bring their own interpretation to it, and you kind of have to embrace that, or you don't kind of have to. You do learn to embrace that. Otherwise, it'll drive you crazy, right? Okay, next. This is a really current piece. This is over at the LA County Museum, and it's kind of a reaction to our current situation, and it's taken out of Dr. Strangelove, but instead of dropping the atomic bomb, right, in this one he's riding the IBM interballistic missile across, and we see one coming back the other way on the bottom too, so it's kind of a mutual nihilistic paradigm, right? That anyway, it's kind of it's a response or just documenting our current situation right now. Next, this piece was a collaboration piece, and I put this in there because I think collaborative pieces sometimes are the most interesting. Now, this lady, Jody Falwell, I consider her the patriarch of contemporary Pueblo pottery. And I've admired her and her work since I was a young art student. And I remember going to see it at the museum, and her stuff just stood out. It was very different from all the other Pueblo pots. So we've become close friends over the years, her and I we do these collaboration pieces. And this particular one, I remember she brought the pot in, and she said, I was talking to her, I said, well, what if we do this brutal scene of these Pueblos getting their a village massacre? I said, why don't we do this? Why don't we do a panel on each side of this of these Pueblo Indians being massacred in front of the church by conquistadors? And I remember Jody just looked at me and said, absolutely not. You're not going to put that on my pot, Diego. She said, I have something totally different in mind. She goes, I want to celebrate life, and she said, what I want to do is a narrative of a young Pueblo girl starting out as a little girl dancing for feast day, and I want to follow her narrative through to through womanhood, I guess, kind of. It was kind of vague, and it doesn't really kind of prescribe to that exactly. But anyway, this is my daughter. This is Cricket, and she does this dance every year with me and the rest of the tribe. She's a very good traditional dancer, and this is her probably at age 7 or 8, maybe. But anyway, and on the other side, next, we have Susan. This is Susan as a young girl. And this is Jody's daughter. So this is both of our daughters, right, on the front side, as little girls, dressed traditional, doing our traditional dance. Okay, next. Then, okay, so this is kind of how the bowl sits on that side. Next, pot. And then on this side, we have Cricket as a young 16-year-old. She's a dancer. My daughter takes ballet and is on point and takes it very serious. And I always wanted to do a ballet dancer because of Degas, right? We'd all seen ballet dancers in art school. So like, this should be interesting. So we got Cricket in her pointe shoes, and we got Jody's other granddaughter, Ka, on the far side, kind of. And I remember Jody described it. She said, I wanted to see the final piece of her blossoming into womanhood. Next. This was okay, this is kind of like that gourd shape, not kind of. All right, it's a gourd pot, okay? and for those of you that study ceramics, we all know that alone kind of plugs it into the history of ceramics, right? When the very first ceramics come into existence, prior to that, they're using gourds as canteens and water ladles as instruments. So the very first ceramics emulate gourds, right? So having said that, there's a long history of gourd pots. Well, so I had made this gourd pot, and I remember I was watching Neil deGrasse Tyson late one night when I was in the studio, and I was thinking of what to put on this. And he was talking about wormholes and time, and how you could jump through this wormhole and you would wind up in another place in the universe. And so that kind of, that's where this is coming from. Next, and I think we'll have multiple sides of it. Yes, here we go. So you can see he's kind of like going through the wormhole, right? And we got the Kirby crackle, and and we got the gold cap on the bottom and the lower part. Anyway, that's what this piece is, what's going on here. It's about time travel and time and the relativity of the universe. Next. This piece is at the museum in Santa Fe, Museum Hill. And it's actually in that building that's to the left of the figure. And this giant statue stands in front of the museum. So this is kind of a take on that whole scene in Planet of the Apes when Charlton Heston's like kind of at the beach at the end of the world, right? And he comes across the Statue of Liberty and he's all, no! And anyway, I guess that always just resonated with me. And I was like, I want to do something like that. So I wanted to pick a high point in Santa Fe, at which point this is one of the higher spots in Santa Fe, Museum Hill. So all of Santa Fe at this point would be underwater for this to actually be taking place. And he's the last boy on Earth, and he's kind of just paddling by, right? This old leftover remnants of mankind. And anyway, so it's about climate change, obviously, right? Okay, next. Is that it? Okay, end the show. All right, thank you guys.